Welcome, a very warm greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us again for another Pariyatti Presents event. My name is Briha Sarathi, and I'm here on behalf of Pariyatti as its Executive Director. We're grateful that you've all joined us today. For those of you who are not already familiar with Pariyatti, we're a non-profit charitable organization based in the USA. Our mission is to enrich the world by disseminating the words of the Buddha, providing sustenance for the seeker's journey, and illuminating the meditator's path. Pariyatti imports books from around the world, reprints books, publishes new titles, and converts existing material into digital formats. We protect and provide an enormous catalog of Dhamma resources in many languages and formats that otherwise would not be as easily available. We offer many free services, such as the Pariyatti Learning Center, Treasures of Pariyatti, and Daily Words for Inspiration via email, RSS feeds, and our mobile app. We offer most audio and video material, as well as many ebooks and audiobooks free of charge, including a large number of resources for students at SM Goenka. We also organize donation-based residential Pali workshops and facilitate pilgrimages for Vipassana meditators. For more information about Pariyatti, please do visit our website at pariyatti.org. That's PARIYATTI.org. Please note that in order to ensure a seamless experience for our audience, we've chosen to pre-record this interview with Dr. Paul Fleischman. The question and answer portion will be live, and Dr. Fleischman will be responding to questions we received during this event. So, please feel free to send your questions via the chat feature in Zoom, and send them to the user named Send Questions Here. So for those of you who are not already familiar with Dr. Fleischman, he's a retired psychiatrist, an author, and a Vipassana teacher appointed by SM Goenka, specifically for presenting Vipassana to Western audiences using scientific concepts. Dr. Fleischman obtained his MD in 1971 and trained in psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine, where he also served as a chief resident in psychiatry. He was a psychiatric consultant to numerous hospitals and clinics, and lectured at conferences, universities, and institutions throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia. His many Pariyatti publications include Cultivating Inner Peace, Karma and Chaos, Vipassana Meditation, the Scientific Worldview, etc. Now, retired from a more than 30-year private psychiatry practice, he lives in rural New England with his wife Susan, who is also a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SM Goenka. Dr. Fleischman's talks and articles are addressed to students looking for clarification about Vipassana's logic, utility, and psychological, biological, and spiritual effects. So today, Dr. Fleischman is interviewed by Kory Goldberg. Kory has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Quebec in Montreal, Canada, and he teaches ethics, critical thinking, religion, and sustainability at Champlain College in Saint-Lambert, Quebec. He co-authored Along the Path, The Meditator's Guide to the Pilgrimage in the Buddha's Land, and is a general editor of the Pariyatti Journal, as well as a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SM Goenka. So without further ado, I give you Paul and Kory.
So welcome everybody to the sixth and final session in our ongoing series examining Paul's latest book, The Power of Small Changes, Vipassana Meditation through the Lens of Biology, Psychology, and Culture. Today's session is a continuation of our investigation into the psychological safety of meditation. We'll have time for a Q&A period at the end of the interview, so if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. And if you do submit a question, we kindly ask that you keep it focused and on topic to help keep the discussion clear and on track. So I'd like to explore how we understand causality, but before we do that, can you explain the terms incidence and prodromal used in modern psychology?
Okay, we can look at these terms, incidence and prodromal, as tools that are going to help us understand causality. So when we look at an illness, it could be any kind of illness, irritable bowel syndrome, cardiac arrest, or a psychiatric disorder. There's a prevalence, which is how common is it? Well, if we think something is increasing the occurrence of heart disease, first we have to know how much heart disease we have now, and has that other event increased the number of patients with heart disease. So prevalence is a word that refers to how many people have this problem? What is the prevalence of heart disease? What is the prevalence of anxiety disorder? What is the prevalence of schizophrenia? But incidence refers to the occurrence of new cases. They're quite different. You can have a high prevalence, a lot of people have this illness, but a low incidence. Not too many people are getting it today. Those who had it in the past still have it. There's a high prevalence, but there's not much new incidence. Or we can have a pretty rare illness, not much prevalence, not too many people have it, but it has a pretty high incidence. There's quite a few new cases coming up. So, for example, we can have a situation, measles is very rare in the modern developed world, but the incidence of measles is pretty high because there's quite a few new cases. So incidence helps us understand what's happening right now in the creation of the numbers for this illness. Then let's see, what was after
Prodromal.
prodromal? Okay, prodromal for some reason is a concept that some people find difficult. It should be quite simple. A syndrome is a collection of states that are used to define an illness. We say this person is suffering from the syndrome that goes along with metabolic disorder. That would be diabetes, obesity, hypertension. That's a syndrome, a collection of symptoms. A syndrome is similar to, but not the same as a disease. A disease is an entity. Syndrome is a collection of things that tend to occur together, but they're not an entity. You can have diabetes and be heavy or thin, but typically diabetics are heavy. So the syndrome of diabetes includes heavy weight, but that's not part of the definition of diabetes, which is based on things like your sugar levels, etc. So a syndrome is sometimes subsequent to a prodrome. Prodrome comes before syndrome, sometimes. Prodrome is the same word as syndrome, but it means coming first. So a prodrome would mean before I knew I had the flu, I just had a little scratchy throat. The scratchy throat didn't cause the flu. The scratchy throat was gone by the time I got the flu. I was in a painful throat. It wasn't no longer scratchy. It was painful. But before I had the flu, I had that little scratchy throat, and it was telling me, watch out, you're getting sick. There was a prodrome ahead of the syndrome of flu, which is fever, painful throat, coughing, sneezing, etc. Psychiatric disorders very frequently, but not always, have prodromes. For example, when a person feels their anxiety, their common garden variety anxiety is getting worse, and they're tipping over into the territory of an anxiety disorder. The syndrome is anxiety disorder, but the prodrome may be, oh, I was feeling anxious, but I could sleep okay. But suddenly I began to be unable to sleep. It was a prodrome to my anxiety getting worse. The reason prodrome is very important is it may signal that something has already begun, and you can't say the events now are causing it because it already had begun earlier, as proven by the presence of the prodrome. Prodrome also can be helpful when people are trying to self-regulate their disorders. They can say, well, I was doing fine and I had no problems until I noticed this prodromal trait, let's say, a difficulty sleeping.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. In the essay on psychological safety of meditation, you assert, and these are in your words, it wouldn't seem probable that meditation is the sole cause of an event in a person unless he or she already contained contributory precursors. This is what you were alluding to. So how does the concept of prodromal health seeking explain why a significant number of people who seek meditation may already be experiencing some form of distress before they even begin the 10-day course.
Great. I think that's one of the very important ideas. And the whole concept of the safety of meditation, the idea of prodromal health seeking, is one of the most important ideas that has to be absorbed. And in the, I would say, inadequate and unreliable research, pseudo research that's been done on the safety of meditation, one of the key factors that's missing that makes the research unreliable is the concept of prodromal health seeking is missing. So let's examine that concept quite carefully. When people begin to feel ill, they may seek care for their problem. That's an adaptive, intelligent thing to do. Instead of ignoring it, people will seek help. Very unfortunately, in our cultures today, still, care for psychological and psychiatric problems is not easy to access. And in fact, as we're talking now, it's gotten worse than when I was writing the essays in this book. And it's gotten worse in the post-COVID world. Our healthcare system is more overloaded with psychiatric disorders. People are suffering more. People are seeking more help. And the system is backed up and clogged. Many people, a number of years ago, many people today, find they can't get the help they want. And so they'll seek help in a number of different formats. For example, a person may go to their psychiatric health service, say they belong to a health insurance system. The health insurance system does provide psychiatric care. They apply for psychiatric help when they notice that they're getting very anxious, their sleep is disrupted, they can't function well. And once they apply for this, they're told, great, come back in 6 months and we'll help you. And this person needs help tomorrow. So a rational person, will seek help in a number of different ways. And this is something that most of us have done. Furthermore, meditation, for better and for worse, both, has developed a reputation as being something that helps you psychiatrically and psychologically. A lot of the basis of our tradition, the tradition of U Ba Khin and S.N. Goenka, was U Ba Khin's statement that Vipassana meditation is not a form of healthcare, should not be used to help people with psychiatric and psychological disorders. And there's a very famous case in which Goenkaji said he wanted to take a 10-day Vipassana course from U Ba Khin, and U Ba Khin refused to let him on the course because Goenkaji wanted to take the course to help his headaches, a medical motivation. The motivation that we promote for Vipassana is something like a way of life, a path to Nibbana, a path of self-purification. All these different terms and concepts apply to something bigger and longer lasting than a healthcare problem. But the prodromal healthcare seeker may well read articles about meditation, may well not understand that there are different kinds of meditation. For example, mindfulness is different than Vipassana in the tradition of S.N. Goenka, but a person who's not familiar with any of those terms may think, well, it's all meditation, and I've read that mindfulness and meditation may cure anxiety disorder. Why don't I go to a 10-day course? So we find when we look at the applicants to 10-day courses, many people are coming not for spiritual life path, Buddhist path, teaching of Dhamma. They're not coming for those reasons. They're coming because they read something on mindfulness that might fix their psychiatric syndrome, and they're just confusing that with Vipassana. So our courses tend to be applied to by people with the motive of healthcare, particularly psychiatric healthcare help. And it's a lovely thing. All of us, to some degree, need help.
Mhm.
All of us are on the path because we want help. All of us are seekers, but seekers is different than treatment seekers. And treatment does not belong in a tradition that's based upon a life path. Treatment should belong in a medical system. But we get our courses filled up with these medical cases.
Mhm. And do you ever find that one reason people might avoid getting help is not always access, although obviously that is a major concern issue, as you just pointed out. But do you think there's also a stigma that people face that they feel shy or embarrassed to seek out psychological help,
I'm going to
psychological
say,
care?
I guess that's true. So when I started as a psychiatrist more than half a century ago, that was commonly said that there was a stigma against psychiatric care. People would not seek out psychiatric care. In spite of that, the clinics I started at, the practice I had, remained filled with a lot of people. So not everybody was hesitant due to the stigma. But let's say the stigma was still there in the 1970s and seemed to be becoming less over the last decades of the 20th century and now in the beginning of the 21st century. I think the stigma is a lot less than it used to be. I think in some subsections of society, that stigma has long evaporated.
Mhm.
Half the TV shows that you can watch have the main character going to a psychiatrist or psychotherapist. So the stigma is evaporating, but and maybe in other segments of society it's still there.
So you take issue with using a colloquial word like trigger to ask a scientific question about psychiatric illness. Can you please differentiate between the terms trigger and cause? And what does this distinction reveal about the complex, multifactorial nature of mental illness?
Great question. That's the whole essay in one sentence. Okay, so a very, very important idea. By the way, an idea that applies to many things, such as international geopolitical situations and applies to physical health as well as mental health. But a trigger is the event that brings a psychological problem to the surface. And then the problem is visible. It's felt by the person who has that problem and it's visible to the people around that person. The trigger is the thing that makes an invisible internal psychological event become a more visible social event. But the trigger can only trigger something that is there. Unfortunately, the word trigger does come colloquially from the image of a gun. And so you can only trigger a gun if you're holding a gun. You can't pull the trigger if the gun is somewhere else. And so that image tells us the word trigger means activating something that is already present, but activating it, making it palpable, making it present, making it visible, making it known. But there's a pre-existing thing to the trigger. So, for example, in psychiatric disorders, um, uh, one of the most uh, heartrending and troubling things you can see in the life of people who have psychiatric problems is that childbirth is a trigger to psychiatric disorder in the mother. That's become a relatively well-known idea. Different um,
Mm.
actresses, different famous persons may acknowledge that after they gave birth to their child, they felt either depressed or incapable of coping or had some other kind of problem. So we know that postpartum depression, postpartum sadness and difficulty with coping is common. Unfortunately, postpartum psychosis also occurs. Some people become psychotic after giving birth. Giving birth can be a trigger, but not all people have this trigger activate something because they don't have the pre-existing conditions. For example, a person who's genetically susceptible to bipolar disorder is more likely to see birth create something like depression than a person who does not have those precursors. So psychiatric disorder consists of many different causal factors operating either with or against each other. Some of the psychological factors can reduce the illness, and some of the psychological factors can trigger the illness, but the illness is there. It's unlikely that something like meditation or anything analogous to it can simply drop into the mind of a person who has no predisposing factors and volcanically and suddenly cause a problem that didn't pre-exist, at least to some degree.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. So let's turn our attention to understanding psychological safety of meditation and responsibility. Vipassana teachers in the tradition of Uba Khin and Goenka, SN Goenka, they're all unpaid volunteers, which guarantees that they're not motivated to sell meditation for a profit. What are some of the benefits of this volunteer model?
Okay, that's a great question because the word volunteer has produced some confusion when we've tried to transfer a tradition based in ancient India and transfer it into the modern world, let's say of modern United States or modern Canada. So we are all volunteers. Uba Khin and Goenkaji were volunteer teachers, and all the teachers in our tradition today are volunteers. Volunteer means unpaid. But volunteer has a connotation, and it often means not very good. So, for example, if you were fielding a football team in the NFL, you wouldn't have volunteers. You would have pros, and you would expect these pros to trained a lot for years and years, starting in childhood. So, professional sounds very good, and volunteer sounds flaky. A volunteer is someone who doesn't really know what they're doing. That's the implication. But in our tradition, we are volunteers in the sense that were unpaid. And that makes the tradition an act of free volition, passed from person to person for motives other than commercial motives. But we're not volunteers in the connotative sense that we don't know what we're doing. Our teachers in our tradition are trained typically for decades before they become assistant teachers or teachers. So we're volunteers, but we're not exactly amateurs or inadequate.
Good. And are there any limitations in this volunteer model, especially with respect to the teacher's roles and particularly concerning offering therapeutic guidance?
Sure. Our Vipassana teachers in the tradition of SN Goenka are people who are giving their time first to learn how to meditate, next to learn how to be people who can conduct meditation courses, and finally to be qualified teachers. This takes a long amount of time, but it brings together people from many different backgrounds. And most of our teachers have a diverse set of backgrounds, making them different from each other. One person may be a computer programmer, another person may be a doctor, another person may be a housewife, another person may be a teacher. all come to their meditation practice and their meditation teacher training with different skills and different backgrounds. And that also means that some people are relatively less prepared in certain things. I can't touch a computer without it breaking, and yet there are people who are Vipassana acharyas who are highly skillful with those strange machines. So one thing that we cannot say is that Vipassana teachers in the tradition of S.N. Goenka are trained psychotherapists. They're not. And people should know that ahead of time and should know that the Vipassana teachers they're encountering are trained to be Vipassana teachers. They're not trained to be psychotherapists or computer programmers.
Good. Let's turn our attention to trying to understand the nuance in assessment and values. So okay, let's look at another quote of yours. The exact line between those people who will benefit from serious meditation and those who won't is not a precise dot on a graph, but is a gray zone of discernment. So what does this gray zone imply for screening during the application process to a 10-day Vipassana course? And why is it crucial for assessment to focus on specific capacities rather than just the presence or absence of a specific diagnosis? And what specific capacities are you referring to in the essay?
We developed a method of screening student applicants for their suitability for Vipassana courses. The screening includes, but is not limited to psychiatric terms and concepts. If someone writes on their application that they have anxiety disorder or depression, we take that into account. Now the screening is done by people who tend to be Vipassana trained experts in this form of screening. And it's no longer done by people like me. I no longer do screening. But the screening is done at each center by the experts at that center who are qualified and trained to do the screening. And they look at an array of factors. The most important two factors are not psychiatric terms and not psychiatric problems. The key factors are the ability to participate and the ability to cooperate. Let's look at participation. Someone can be very well motivated, perfectly capable of taking a Vipassana course, let's say from the standpoint of many, many factors, a lovely person quite ready to take the course, and yet they may have some barrier to participation. Maybe it's their busy schedule. Maybe it's their pressures of their family life. But maybe it's also certain factors from within. Meditation course occurs at a meditation center. You live there for 10 days. Some of them may have extreme feelings of privacy. Once we had an example of someone who was very concerned with germs. They may not feel comfortable in participating at a meditation center where there's 100 people in residence. And with all we do to keep the centers impeccably healthy and clean, maybe that person can't participate. So the issue of participation and the ability to actually go through all the steps of the course. For example, stay overnight for 10 days, not eat much of a dinner, just a small snack at the evening meal, get up early in the morning, meditate in a meditation hall for many hours a day. All those demands are not specifically about mental health or mental illness. They're specific skills or abilities or interests or concerns of specific applicants, and our application process it's our responsibility to accurately inform people you're going to have to participate in, for example, getting up at 4:30 a.m. Do you want to do that? And there's a set of those factors. That's participate. Cooperate is slightly different. A person may feel something like this. I know quite a bit about meditation. I'd like to take another course, 10-day course from this Goenka of Vipassana tradition. But as a pretty expert person, I don't really feel I need the teacher. I'm just going to listen to the discourses and practice on my own. Well, that person is not ready to cooperate with the teacher. We suggest that that person not come because if they run into any difficulties, the teacher won't know how to help them since that student has already been uncooperative with the tradition and its method of proceeding. So those are the two most important factors, and in those factors, they contain multiple other factors. A person may be very, very willing to cooperate, extremely cooperative, helpful person, but they may say, when I get into panic disorder, I just freak out. I really can't respond to what the assistant teacher or teacher is going to tell me. I just have to do the things I know that are necessary for me to deal with my panic disorder. Well, that's a fine person, but we don't feel we can help someone who can't cooperate and listen to the teaching we're giving. So that person wouldn't be wise to come to one of our courses. So we focused on those two, but the screening itself includes multifactorial. And I think the screening grows, we could say it goes through multiple stages. We can't go into the exact details. On each center is slightly different. I wouldn't necessarily know the screening factors in each and every center, but we can say screening is divided into two parts. There's the kind of what used to be called the paperwork, or we can now say the screen work of an actual application. But then there's the conversation. Sometimes a conversation may be an email conversation, sometimes it may be a live telephone or screen conversation. But a conversation is a deeper way, a better way of assessing a tricky or uncertain application as to whether this person will feel the course is good for them.
Mhm. And in addition to the cooperation and participation, what about the capacity to understand the teachings? Is that also considered very important?
Yeah, well, obviously, if you can't understand, you can't do what's being asked. It's not very frequent that we have people who can't understand. One thing, the biggest obstacle to understanding is actually language.
Yeah.
We work so hard at making Vipassana available in so many languages with tapes and so many languages many languages I've hardly heard of. Still, a person can be getting the tapes, the instructions, the discourses in their own language, and yet if they can't understand English at all, and the assistant teacher or teacher speaks only English, you still have a problem in understanding. So maybe that person should go to a course that's conducted only by an assistant teacher or teacher who speaks that particular language. So understanding does come up, even though we try to minimize it.
Mhm. And how do cultural values and personal interpretations influence how individuals experience and retrospectively assess their meditation experiences?
That's a good question because some very uh, skillful rethinking about meditation has pointed out that the same experience in two different people can be seen in two different ways and have two different impacts, even though the experience itself was either similar or identical. For example, um, if somebody is taking a meditation course and they have a very sad memory, they remember the time when their parent died, they can say, well, I had this strong, very strong emotion arise up while I was meditating, extreme sorrow and grief of loss. But then they can play it back to themselves with different meanings. For example, someone can say, that sorrow that came up on the surface during the meditation course was very unpleasant. I really don't want to take any more meditation courses because it was upsetting and I don't like it. Someone else can say, I had sorrow and grief come up in remembering my parents' death and I had this experience on a meditation course, and it was a wonderful thing. It relieved me of a pressure of sorrow that had been inside me, and now it came on the surface, and I could see it, I could feel it, and I could let go of it. I can't wait till my next meditation course. I'm sure the next one will also bring me memories, thoughts, or feelings that I can get relieved of rather than harboring them within me. So the way we reconstrue an event is part of our total event. The event over time becomes what happened and what we think about what happened, how we assess it. And culture plays a strong influence there. For example, some cultures may have strong uh, criticisms of certain kinds of emotional experiences. And if you tend to have those experiences on a meditation course, and you come from a culture that says you shouldn't have experiences like that, then you may not like the course. An example to that may be, well, some people meditate and they may have sexual feelings arise on their mind. According to the Buddha, all people have sexual feelings, and they're among the last feelings to leave the enlightened person, meaning right up to the state of enlightenment, right up to the state of Buddhahood, whatever that may be. People do have sexual feelings. Well, if you're meditating and this happens to you, and you're from a culture that says, well, we know that's true, the Buddha said that's true, or common sense says that's true, or our culture says that's true, you have these experiences on a meditation course and you feel, well, of course, now I'm learning to deal with those feelings in a meditative way. But if you're from a repressive or restrictive culture that says those feelings are bad, you shouldn't have them, people who have those feelings are bad people, then you will feel, well, I had those feelings on my meditation course. My meditation course made me feel like I'm a bad person. I never want to go back.
Mm.
So a cultural value system may lead a person to assess their meditation in various ways that is independent from the experiences they're having and that is based upon their pre-existing values.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful for understanding. You mentioned that if 2 million people take Vipassana courses, a certain percentage will inevitably have psychiatric issues, regardless of the impact of meditation. You further note in the essay the significant prevalence of psychiatric disorders in the general population, approximately 25% of Americans, for instance, noting that if, quote unquote, the nation of psychiatric illness were a real country, it would be the third largest in the world. Given this widespread reality, it is inevitable that meditation centers will encounter individuals with various mental health challenges. So I have a couple of questions around this. First, why is it important for the conversation about meditation safety to acknowledge this baseline?
We were discussing before the idea that meditation, that mental health issues may continue to be shameful or hidden or unadmitted. I think that's less so than when I started my career,
Mhm.
but it's still probably there. And one of the ways you can see it is that it isn't really accepted common knowledge that in every single population of the world, there are psychiatrically hindered people. They're always present in every population. We accept the idea that if we go around in the population of any country or any city or any state in the world, we'll find people with heart disease. We'll find people with cancer. We know they're going to be there. We just have to find them. But it's a little harder to accept the idea that in every one of those jurisdictions, there'll also be people with psychiatric disorders and similar ones as well. In every jurisdiction of the world, we will find depression, anxiety, bipolarity, schizophrenia, etc. Therefore, having a study about the safety of meditation, which says that after meditation courses, we interviewed we put up a notice on a website said, if you have psychiatric disorder after a meditation course, please let us know. The answer is, of course, there are people like that. There are people like that before the meditation course, after the meditation course, and independent of the meditation course. There's a prevalence of heart disease everywhere. There's a prevalence of bipolar disease everywhere. There's a presence of cancer everywhere. There's a presence of schizophrenia everywhere. Everywhere. Everywhere means everywhere. There's no exception, and meditators are no exception. So you can get a false sense that the presence of these problems in meditators means meditation caused them. Very few people would say the presence of cancer in meditators, which is there, because cancer is present in every human population. No one would say meditation therefore causes cancer.
So, what do these numbers, combined with the understanding that distress is frequently a precursor to the desire to learn meditation, suggest about the responsible choices for both potential meditation students as well as the Vipassana teachers?
Well, as we were discussing, there is this prodromal health seeking, but in a certain sense, we can say, since all people have some predisposition to some psychiatric problems, some medical problems, and since all people will eventually get sick and die, all of us share this awareness that something can happen to us, and we should prepare ourselves ahead of time to be kind of people who are skillful, intelligent, and competent in coping with things that we don't want to cope with, things that we dread, things that are difficult. And that's the core teaching of the Buddha. The core teaching of the Buddha is meditation is for holding in a better light
Mm.
condition of life that we call suffering, or call dukkha, or call the unsatisfactory illness, death component of life. And so we're all seeking help. We all have problems, and we're all somewhere on the continuum of people who want help but may or may not benefit from a meditation course. So that's why, going back to what we've been discussing, as screening guidance from all meditation teachers should be available. We should be making clear statements to our potential students about who is most likely to benefit and who is likely to not benefit.
Mm.
And our statements should be clear and available. At the same time, people applying should understand that the course may be appropriate for them, may not be appropriate for them, and the screening process will help them determine whether they're appropriate to take the course. But all of us are in the same bigger bucket. All of us are human beings who will face some degrees of suffering, and meditation is a tradition that enriches our life capacity to deal with these sets of difficulties.
Thank you. Very well said. So, to wrap up today's session, as well as this series on the power of small changes, could you please describe the overarching long-term goals of Vipassana meditation in the Goenka tradition? And how do they relate to this idea that meditation is really solely a path for spiritual development rather than a cure for illness?
In the teaching of the Buddha, there's only one goal. Everybody who's walking the path, who's learning how to meditate, has the same goal, and that goal is nibbana. But nibbana is a word that's elusive, may be difficult to understand, and even if one understands it, it may be a long, long ways away from who we are at this moment. It's also a term that's not familiar to Westerners, and the concepts underlying it may be a little more elusive to Westerners. So we can say the goals of meditation for everybody are to be less subject to internal states of negativity like hatred, anger, ill will, depression, hopelessness, and to be more able to draw up from within our own psychological repertoire, from within our own mind, from within our own heart, positive states such as loving kindness, competence, effectiveness in the world, helpfulness, generosity, the desire to serve other people. So we're defining nibbana in a more colloquial, 21st century psychological way by looking for a better way of life based upon greater access to health-giving mental states.
Great. Thank you. Very well said. So that was wonderful. I'm really happy that we got to do this. I feel really privileged that we got to do this series together. And now for this last part of the series, we'll have our final Q&A. And so please start sending your questions into the chat box, and if you haven't already. And yeah, so let us begin with the questions.
Okay.
Can you talk about how meditation might trigger mental health issues for someone, even though it doesn't cause them? How are teachers trained to recognize when a student might be in distress and might need to leave a course and seek psychiatric help?
It's a very good question, a very long question. Let's go to the second part first, how teachers are trained, and then we'll go to the issue of triggering. So teacher training is a long process. People start to become ATs. They're trained both verbally, literally educated, but they're also trained in practice. So they're beginning to conduct courses. They have a lesser role. They start just watching an experienced teacher. Then they graduate to partly conducting the course, but being observed and supervised. So that's a whole complex process that we can't describe here, but let's say teachers are rigorously trained to recognize students who are in difficulty and to reach out to them and extend help. That is part of our Vipassana tradition and how it continues by training new people to become teachers. Now, this issue of triggering, many people take Vipassana courses. Most people who take Vipassana courses are not triggered into anything at all. Quite the contrary, they have a reduction of internal distressful states because what internal distress they have is relatively more contained, or because when it arises on the course, it produces a experience of difficulty that the meditation is useful in reducing. So those two groups of people constitute the majority of people. It can happen, however, that if someone's meditating in silence with no disruptions for days on end, different past memories, thoughts, fears, worries that weren't very prominent can rise up in that absence of distraction, absence of alternative stimulation, absence of other people to distract you. And in that, these darker wells of internal life may rise to the surface. Well, in a way, that's the whole goal of meditation. But if the event, worry, fear, daydream, reality, history that rises up in the person's mind is so very strong that it disrupts the person's ability to use meditation to deal with this problem, then the problem will overwhelm the meditation. So that's what we screen for. That would be one way of describing what we screen for. We screen for making sure that people who come to a course are not going to be flooded away by some powerful, hidden thing that rises to the surface. But because these kinds of experiences may be hidden to the individual themselves, they may not realize how deeply they still feel about their mother's death 20 years ago, or they may not realize how deeply they still feel about an experience where they were treated prejudicially based upon gender, race, etc. And these experiences are, in their own mind, these experiences are minimized. And when they take the course, they find, well, this experience was not minimal at all. In fact, it's flooding me. It's taking over my mind. I need help. Hopefully, the meditation and the help of the assistant teacher or teacher will bring about a reversal in which this experience becomes containable, understandable, reorganizable, able to sit more easily in the person's psyche, and may even, at some point, probably not in one course, may even disappear as an issue entirely, be healed, be helped to the point that it becomes insignificant. But if the volcanic uprising of this past emotional event occurs on a course, it can trigger something that will overwhelm the person. And yes, assistant teachers are trained to recognize it, deal with it as well as they can, and also to recognize when this particular event may go beyond the power of meditation to help that person, and that person needs more help for the things that are inside them.
Thank you. So the next student, questioner, there's many parts to it, so I'll shorten it a little bit. But basically, he's asking, what role does Vipassana have in dealing with anxiety, general anxiety disorder, and depression if one is if one is unable to feel sensations or one is unable to do anapana? And if the person is in this situation, should they just try to continue meditating or should they seek professional help?
Well, Vipassana consists of either doing anapana or feeling sensations and trying to be equanimous with them, that is to say, doing Vipassana. So if you can't do either of them, you're not going to get very much help from Vipassana. You would be working hard, but with a reduced set of tools, and the very tools that the Course offers would be unavailable to you. I would say that wouldn't be a wise way to proceed. But it's often true that people get psychiatric help and later on become quite able to do a course that was much more difficult for them when they were much more strongly beset with anxiety and depression. When people are on psychiatric meds, that issue alone is not the reason that they're rejected for coming to a course. We have many, 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 probably literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands, if you include Vipassana all around the world, people who've taken Vipassana courses while they're on different kinds of psychiatric medication. But if the psychiatric medication is an indication that the person is unable to cope well with the distress they have, that would be a situation in which it would be unwise for a person having difficulties to push themselves to attend the ardor of a 10-day course. But this person who's asking the question, probably it sounds like that would be an indication to get some help first, be able to be more self-observing, and then use the skills and tools that Vipassana would bring on another course when they're more ready.
Great. So here's a question about blood pressure. Can meditation help with blood pressure, and is this accurate in all cases?
The idea that meditation helps with blood pressure comes from studies on mindfulness to reduce blood pressure. It doesn't come from studies on Vipassana. There are differences between mindfulness and Vipassana. One of the most striking differences is the duration and intensity of practice. Mindfulness is not taught in 10-day residential retreats. Vipassana is. Also, people practice Vipassana as they choose after a course. No one monitors them. No one approves or disapproves of their practice. But we recommend 2 hours a day, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. And that's fairly intense practice. Vipassana, say being on the path of Vipassana, is an intense commitment to meditation practice. So the intensity and duration of Vipassana practice has not been studied as a treatment for blood pressure. But going back to what we've discussed all through this conversation about safety, we know that our ancestors in this tradition, specifically U Ba Khin, said, don't make your Vipassana practice a treatment for illness. The reason is your goal for meditating will be diminished to a particular medication, medical treatment goal, instead of having the bigger goal of the character changes that the path towards Nibbana is intended to produce. Character changes meaning having fewer defilements in the old-fashioned language, having more paramis or virtues in the old-fashioned language, and in the modern language we say being less beset and troubled, and having more optimistic, pro-social, generous attitudes and feelings. And that's very different than really regulating your blood pressure. So I have no idea, and I don't even have an interest in whether Vipassana reduces blood pressure or not. Its goals and importance are different.
So this student, this student is bringing up a situation, a scene from the Samyutta Nikaya, where a group of monks who are thinking about, the foulness of the body end up killing themselves. Would this be classified as a mental illness that was triggered? Do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's a frequently confusing point for very serious students. It sounds like the person who asked this question is quite a serious student. They've studied intensely in the Pali Canon as well as practicing Vipassana. But the episodes in the Pali Canon cannot be taken for the presence or absence of mental illness. This is a small anecdote, a few sentences long, and it doesn't tell us anything at all about the actual mental state or the personal history or the physical and mental health of the people involved. It's a legend. It's an anecdotal legend, and it doesn't tell us anything about mental illness, either present or absent. One thing it does tell us, though, is that the teaching should not emphasize negative states. The teaching should not be a preaching about dukkha, suffering, misery, etc. Instead, the teaching should always be framed as the awareness of suffering and the path out of suffering, both.
Thank you. Does physical exercise help people with their meditation practice?
Well, we don't want to have meditation courses where people come to them and then it's hard enough, and there are things that are recommended. For example, taking the vows to live a life of good Shila, that's recommended. Meditating twice a day is recommended. Meditating twice a day for an hour is recommended. Coming back for more courses is recommended. We have a lot of recommendations already. They're all very much focused on Vipassana and the path and the actual ongoing practice of Vipassana through the lifetime. So to add more things in is not our goal. We could add in, well, you should exercise and you shouldn't eat too much animal fat and you should always walk at least 7,000 steps a day, etc. Pretty soon we'll be a prescriptive organization telling people how to live in every detail. So we don't prescribe we don't describe health care practices. That's not our primary goal. However, if you look around at a group of serious meditators, you're going to find they all exercise quite seriously. And the reason for that is meditation, vipassana, awareness of sensations, makes you very aware of how exercise does bring health and well-being to your body. So we do not recommend exercise, but in fact, if you become serious as a meditator, you'll find yourself motivated to exercise along with your meditation practice.
So this student asks, is taking antidepressants considered an avoidance of the current sensations you're experiencing in the body?
Okay, wonderful question, because antidepressants are prescribed in vast numbers all throughout the world, and that includes developing countries and developed countries. In some ways, that's a wonderful thing. We have a way to help people in their depth of distress. And in another way, it causes some problems. These medications are prescribed widely. Prescription behavior is not always followed by follow-up behavior on the part of very busy doctors and healthcare services. There are side effects and problems that the medications can induce. And not everybody who would benefit from an antidepressant actually needs it. A lot of things that people take antidepressants for are quite temporary. And if they had a skill or an ability to deal with some of the symptoms, some of the prodromal problems, some of the syndromal problems, if a capacity to deal with them is increased, the person may not need those medications. So this person asking the question, if you're a random person with a minor problem and you take an antidepressant, it will change the sensations in your body for sure. You will have different sensations than you would have had if you hadn't taken the medication. And to some degree, we can criticize that medication taking behavior as an avoidance of awareness and dealing with the natural sensations that are occurring to you in your state of depression. But I had a good friend who said to me, sometimes meditators don't take antidepressants. They have some vanity or pride that they don't need medication because they're meditators. But I don't see meditators walking around without eyeglasses because they want to avoid the sensations of being nearsighted, or they want to avoid the sensations of having cataracts. So we all agree that as modern meditators, we should be seeking the medical care we need, the medications we need, the treatment we need from doctors. The thing that comes up over and over in this conversation is Vipassana is not offered as medical care. And if there's a person who's significantly depressed, whose doctor feels they would benefit from antidepressants, they're properly prescribed, they're properly followed, then the sensations in their body now are the sensations they have partly from their depression, partly from the medication, partly from many other factors of their life. And their meditation practice right now, today, consists of awareness of all of those sensations, including the ones that are muted or augmented by the antidepressants. And their practice now is the reality of that situation in this moment. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
This question comes from a serious Vipassana practitioner who's also a qualified psychologist. And he asks, what might be the disadvantages of being a psychologist? I'm guessing from the perspective of Vipassana.
I can't think of any disadvantages. Yeah, it may be is the question. Maybe the question implies if you already have an understanding about the mind, illness, health, right ways to live, wrong ways to live, right ways to relate to people, wrong ways to relate to people, how to deal with mental problems. And if you have ideas like that, and they derive from Western civilization, will you bump into something unpalatable or problematic for you in Vipassana? And I'd say, yes, that's going to happen. But you'll get through that. You'll find that the differences in the worldviews can be translated and negotiated into a synthesized perspective where the worldviews of Vipassana are easily compatible with highly intelligent, well-informed Western knowledge of psychology. I know that's true because that's what I had to do. I did definitely bump into some problems of my own mind of saying, hey, that's not the way I understand it, but that's not right according to what I know, and then have to rethink and synthesize, make a complex synthesis of these two worlds. It's quite possible. So I don't see any problems for that psychologist.
Okay. So this person writes, sometimes course applicants feel like they're being told something is wrong with them if they are rejected. How can the need to screen applicants be balanced with not stigmatizing people for current or past mental health challenges?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. That's great. So, in the chapter on safety of meditation in the book, The Power of Small Changes, I explicitly say that people who take a Vipassana course and the people who are told they cannot take a Vipassana course, one group is no superior to the others. It may be a person, I gave examples of cooperation and participation. Sometimes a person has a problem right now that prevents them from either cooperating or participating. That doesn't mean the totality of their life is flawed or bad. They may be the greatest mother. They may be the most brilliant psychiatrist. They may be a very helpful, good, pro-social, positive person in the world, but have some obstacle. For example, panic attack. It doesn't stop the excellence of your life, but it doesn't mean you don't want to sit still for 10 days without access to, let's say, the help you might need if you went into panic. So we should find skillful ways and skillful language in dealing with people such that it's clear. First, I don't like the word rejection for a Vipassana course. How about advice that this is not right for you right now? There are quite a few people who are advised not to take a course, who are also advised to apply again when the particular situation that's haunting them right now has been ameliorated either by treatment, by time, by change in life circumstances, change in work, change in family circumstances that may reduce these problems. So that's a good challenge to us to find the right way. But I want the person who asked this question to know I definitely do not like the term rejection and the attitude that's implied with it. I agree with the intent of their question 100%. We're not judging people or saying who's a good person. We're simply asking, will you benefit from 10 days of silence, a pretty mediocre dinner, long hours of sitting still, lots of demands upon you to control your behavior in many ways as you cooperate in this course. That's all. Not your excellence as a human being.
That's a great point. This question asks, what is the role of an AT in maintaining psychological safety?
Huge. Yeah. ATs should be well educated in this problem, are being diligently educated in this problem during their training. They should carry that forward. We continue almost every year. There's some assistant teacher meeting where there's further training or teaching on these points of what makes a course safe, how can students be made safe, what do we need to be alert to, what problems might arise. So the assistant teacher is a very well educated bulwark against difficulties overwhelming students. But ATs are, as we discussed, they're not mental health professionals, nor, even if they were mental health professionals, could they stop human beings from having the array of illnesses and problems, mental and physical, that human beings do have. Vipassana is not necessarily going to change your blood pressure, and it's not necessarily going to treat your anxiety disorder.
So here's a challenging question for you. As somebody writes who he or she was a course manager
Oh,
on course, and a student was shaking rigorously, punching in the air, and unable to stop. And so the person is asking, um, was this was this meditation causing this? Was it due to some kind of sankharas, or was it due to something supernatural?
Well, of course, I don't know what was happening with that student. So one of the good implications of this question, this kind-hearted, concerned question, is Goenkaji admonishes us, don't look around the room. And he gives the joke where you look around the room and everybody else is sitting still like a statue and you're squirming. But that's not the only reason not to look around the room. The other reason is we don't know what's going on with other people. I would like to think in that situation that the assistant teacher noticed this going on, um, was making some sort of informed decision whether to interview this student, say, come on up at 5 o'clock or come on up after the discourse and let's have a minute or two conversation about what was going on with you. Did you feel it was a sankhara coming up? Did you feel you needed my help? Is there any more I can help you with? Are you working with it fine? I don't really need to interfere. You'll manage whatever's coming up. So we don't know the answer. We hope the AT would be responsive. We shouldn't be looking around and worrying about people where we don't know the critical information which can best be attained through a conversation. But it does happen that people are so caught up in a memory, a feeling state, a thought pattern that arises in the mind during the long days of silence. And that can trigger motoric behavior, somewhat like people, not exactly the same, but analogous to people who have sleepwalking episodes. So, yes, it can be due to a sankhara. It could also be due to things like a neurological illness. It could also be due to falling asleep, and sometimes people do fall asleep when they're sitting up, and they show the reactions of a sleep behaved person. So let's not pretend we know the answer, but let's hope that the AT was alert and offered assistance.
This next person is asking about grief, especially with the passing of one's mother. Do you have any comment about that? How might that student practice?
These are the things that happen to almost everyone. One of the stumbling blocks, if psychologists ask the question, does psychologists have any problems? And I interpreted that to mean our mental conditioning will come up in Vipassana, and will certain mental conditionings be a problem in taking Vipassana? And so those are unique ones. Few people are psychologists. But there are certain mental states that almost every human being passes through. Death of your mother is one that's very common. Sometimes people don't have it. The mother has died when the child was 2 months old and the child doesn't remember, or somebody may die before their mother dies. But typically, it's that kind of syndrome is incorporated into what the Buddha called dukkha. And when people hear about this, it's one of the reasons that people run away from Vipassana. It's pessimistic, it's about dukkha, it's about suffering, it's about grief, it's about sorrow, it's about loss. Yes, it is. But it's also about the path out of those problems. So I would say there's no better place in the world to be remembering and thinking about the death of your parent than on a Vipassana course. I had the experience, it's now many, many years ago, about 35, 40 years ago, where I was scheduled to conduct a course, and Goenkaji was the teacher, and I was going to be the assistant teacher answering questions on this course. And it was what's called the Satipatthana course, slightly more advanced course. And shortly before the course was to begin, my father died. And I went to Goenkaji and said, I don't know if I should be the assistant teacher on this course. It may not be a good idea. He agreed. It was not a good idea. I was taken off the course as assistant teacher, put in a little cottage on the campus of the meditation center, which in those days acted like your own residential quarters in your own cell, and stay there and meditate the Satipatthana course there. That's better than conducting a course when you're in acute grief. I sat this course with this event on my mind, and I felt I was one of the luckiest things happening in my life, because subsequent to that, I felt I had managed and dealt with that grief better than would have been possible had I not been able to take a Vipassana course, Satipatthana form of Vipassana course, right after the death of my father. So the best place to be is in a Vipassana course, or be a Vipassana practitioner when your mother dies.
Great answer. So this person is asking, can a long-time Vipassana meditator still practice usefully as they progress into Alzheimer's?
Well, we've had cases like that. It's a very poignant and heartrending situation. I would say Alzheimer's is a big tent. A lot of things go on. People are diagnosed as having Alzheimer's, and they may indeed have it, but they may have just the prodromal form, the incipient form. The good doctor, the good neurologist, notices this as soon as it starts. But there's not much going on in the way of treatment. There are treatments, but they're modest in their impact. In the beginning, that person may be able to practice Vipassana, but unfortunately, it does become increasingly difficult. Concentration and focus of the mind is a demanding neurological state. When we're meditating, we're using our brains actively. And as you lose control of your brain with Alzheimer's, you lose the ability to meditate, sadly.
So this person is asking about using Vipassana as a spiritual bypass. We did talk about this in the first or second interview. Do you want to touch upon it, or should we just tell the person to refer back to an earlier episode?
I think the word spiritual bypass, we cover that. So it's back here on the early parts of this conversation of all the chapters in the book.
So here I think somebody misunderstood you, because the person writes, Paul mentioned last time not having discussion groups. Still, there's advice in the suttas to talk about Dhamma instead of harmful gossip. How do we do this? So I don't think you said that. I think you actually said the opposite. So I don't know if you want to just
Well,
comment.
let's go into that a bit. One feature of our tradition is that it is a tradition. A tradition means we keep doing things in the way we were doing things. If you don't like traditions, you say they're conservative, they preserve old formats. I don't like that. It's not for me. But if you're a person who likes a tradition, you'll feel there's a way of doing things that has been honed and formed by excellent, very outstanding people. Who am I to disrupt or alter that? I'll go along with this excellent precursor. So, for example, if you want to be a doctor, you don't just suddenly proclaim, I'm a doctor. You follow the traditions of medicine and you learn those in medical school. They may evolve with time and change, but at least you're aware of the tradition, you honor it, you revere it, and you practice it before you change it. So discussions about how you should practice meditation are not encouraged in our Vipassana centers because we teach how to practice meditation. We're learning it, and we're learning it in a particular way of doing it that's been formatted, clarified, approved of, and practiced over decades by millions of people. So we're not encouraging people to say, on day 7, I think we should meditate differently than Goenkaji tells us to do. That's not a conversation that we feel is useful. How is that person going to know more than Goenkaji? But conversations about Dhamma are infinitely valuable and belong in our life. And conversations about Dhamma, as described in the kinds of passages this person is alluding to in the Pali Canon, in the legends of the Buddha's day. What's encouraged is telling about the advantages of Dhamma, speaking positively about the teacher and the teaching, um, expressing with other people how the virtues are multiplying or the difficulties are diminishing. That is a conversation among friends on the path, affirming what's helpful, important on the path. And when there are problems, conversations with assistant teachers and teachers are also encouraged. It's also encouraged to say, I can't do this practice, or I'm having a problem, or I get upset, or I'm too tired, or I fall asleep too often, or I'm too bored. Please help me. Those conversations are also encouraged.
Great. So this person is going back to the last conversation we had around the dark night of the soul and maybe the misunderstanding of terms. So I won't go through it's a very long comment and question, but maybe can you just share a comment about the knowledge of the awareness of fearfulness and the knowledge of disgust? These are two terms that we hear in the Visuddhimagga, and also Goenkaji mentions them in the long courses.
Okay. These are excellent points that have to do with two features. Well, first feature, which we have alluded to already in these conversations, the problems with translation. The word fearsome and disgust, immediately a modern Western person will go, whoa, that is pretty dark night of the soulish. It's pretty ugly. Who wants it? If this practice encourages awareness of it, I don't think this is going to be practice for me. So those terms are coded into the life of modern people in a different way and in a different linguistic English language context than they were encoded in the lives of people who are a legend in the Pali Canon. One of the important differences, we live in a society we're promised, and you Canadians don't have this problem, but we Americans have this problem, we're promised the pursuit of happiness. And in Vipassana, you have to learn about disgust. That doesn't seem compatible. But the people in the Pali Canon, the ancients 2,500 years ago in India, weren't promised the pursuit of happiness. Life was hard, it was shorter, and it was, for most people, it was a very arduous life, predominantly based upon agriculture and its fluctuations and limitations, and disease states and limited medical care. So those terms today are important for us, and we have to cross this kind of problem where we rebel against language that comes from the human circumstance before we were guaranteed, more or less, the American today, the Canadian today, the European today, even the person in developing countries, India and China today, can expect a long life, pretty healthy life, reasonably safe life, reasonable comfort in terms of dealing with cold, dealing with hunger, dealing with heat. We expect positive things. We don't expect our meditation practice to remind us, to bring us up front into confrontation with those issues of dukkha I referred to in the last questions. The inevitable pain, loss, decay, and death that is absolutely guaranteed to be in our lives. So our practice needs to have us confront, I hesitate with the word disgust, I would say recognition that we don't control our bodies, but we have better control of our minds. And by framing, practicing, meditating the way that we can learn to let go of concepts about our bodies and sensations, concepts that make us wish and demand that they always be pleasant. If we can let go of that, that's a step in the direction of greater mental freedom. That's what those terms are encouraging us to do.
Great. Thank you, Paul. So this person is asking, if I have criticism of the policies or practices of a center where I've meditated, how can I be heard and not feel ignored?
Great. That's a really good question, and it comes up from time to time. We have, let's say, a typical meditation center in the United States today may have, say, 100 people on a course, maybe less, may have at least a course every month, probably more. So you're getting in the range of 1,000 students a year or so. If the center is overly unctuous in its effort to appease the problems of every person, there would be an infinite conversation. If the center is overly rigid and doesn't listen to feedback, it may miss circumstances where it can be more helpful to the student or more amenable to the student's needs. We've had hundreds or maybe thousands of small changes in the way our centers are run based upon what was initially negative feedback, critical feedback. But we can't respond to everybody and make our centers acceptable to every single person's need when there are, with, say, round figure 20 centers, round figure 1,000 persons a year at a center, tens of thousands of people taking these courses. It's inevitable that someone will feel the food is incompatible with me or the sleep schedule is incompatible with me, and the center can't respond. The channel for these complaints should be a conversation with the assistant teacher or teacher who conducted the course. That's the proper channel. The proper channel is not a Pariyatti podcast, for example. Pariyatti is not a meditation center. It's an educational and nonprofit. So the direct channel, the student should go back to whoever conducted their course and say, this is my complaint. This is my problem. Can you listen to it? Can a change be made to help me or not?
Thank you. So this person's asking, how have you personally seen the Vipassana organization mature over time? And what is your hope for the future of the organization?
Wow. Well, it's matured enormously and changed enormously. There were only initially, there were no centers at all. I did take a course when there was no centers in this tradition, and only what we then called gypsy courses. We've now found that name not the best, changed it to non-center courses, but there were no centers. So the biggest change, the single biggest change, is the existence of centers, and who knows how many there are. And then the accompanying change that had to come along with the existence of centers was the existence of appointed teachers and assistant teachers. If there's no teacher at the center, how will it continue? So Goenkaji, as an institutionally formatting elder, didn't just teach Vipassana. He organized institutions where Vipassana could be taught and continuing. And the two most important steps were the centers and the teachers. But then there are these thousands of little details, particularly as Vipassana came into the West. Issues like, well, we're vegetarian, but are we vegan? Or issues like, what if a person isn't vegetarian? Then issues of clothing. People in the West wear different clothing. What about what is acceptable? If it's a hot day, we want to have a polite, well-mannered center. What kind of clothes can people wear? Shorts, etc. So thousands of conversations occurred over decades involving thousands of old students as to how to make Vipassana consistent with the tradition it inherited, not altering or ruining what had been created by these Vipassana elders. I might like to say these are Vipassana geniuses like Ubaken and Goenkaji. How can we preserve that and still be relevant and acceptable and helpful to the people in different cultures all over the world. I'm most familiar with the American scene. What I would like to see, Goenkaji's goal for Vipassana, he always said, was there should be a Vipassana center in every town or village, like there's a gymnasium, like there's a school. That seems a little arduous. We'd need a lot of centers. We'd need a lot of assistant teachers and teachers. It takes a long time to become an assistant teacher. It's hard to train so many. So I would hope for continuous growth in the same way that these recent decades have produced so much growth in the way Vipassana is taught. Let's hope the next decades are equally productive and the decades after that are equally productive until meditation in the Vipassana way is widely available to almost anyone, almost anywhere.
Great. Is the use of medical marijuana incompatible with Vipassana practice?
No, but there are some problems that come up. Is it a legitimate use of medical marijuana? So sometimes, frequently, medical marijuana is just a avoidance of the illegality and not necessarily a real medical prescription. If it's a real medical prescription, a doctor is prescribing it, thinks it's valuable and important, sees it as part of a person's therapeutic regimen, there is no problem with that. And an example might be epilepsy, but an example, there are many other examples where it might be a legitimate and helpful medication. Another problem that comes up with medical marijuana is the method of use. We have smoke-free centers, and we do have scent-free centers. We don't want people taking medications that have strong impact upon non-users. For example, somebody's in a dorm at night taking a very skunk-smelling strong medication. Obviously can't smoke, obviously can't vape. How are they taking this? But if it's an oral medication that doesn't intrude upon the other meditators, then it should be no different than any other medication that a person is taking. The question is, why are they taking it? Is it legitimate? Will it enable them to cooperate and participate? Will they be able to work with awareness of breath, awareness of sensations? Then they're welcome.
Okay, so again, there's a lot of questions that we've already covered, so we won't go into those. This person, it's a challenging question for you. Does sexual orientation have any significance in Vipassana in this tradition? Does it seem as seen as something neutral and not affecting one's practice?
Right now it's seen as something neutral and not affecting one's practice. There's no reason why the assistant teacher or teacher even has to know what a person's sexual orientation is. When Vipassana was originally emerging from being a rare practice that was just held in monastic circumstances in Asian countries with traditions of Buddhist monasticism, then in those days, the issues of sexual orientation were contained within the traditions that made sexual orientation compatible with the ancient societies. Well, that's a cumbersome way of saying that being gay was a problem for Vipassana practitioners when Vipassana was still seen as a monastic practice. Today, with Vipassana available widely around the world, there's no reason the center should even know a person's sexual orientation. If the center does, there's no reason why that should be any more of an issue. But for all people, the issues of sexuality, how it's expressed, with whom, under what circumstances, is an issue. And it's still an issue for a person who's gay or not gay about how Vipassana and their sexuality will integrate. Vipassana does see sexuality as something that needs a container, a channel, an understanding, an insight, and levels of insightful self-regulation.
So here's an insightful question. I'm going to combine a couple of people's questions here. So this person writes, I'm a very old student who's been walking this path for many years. I also struggle with depression and anxiety. While it's been a great tool for coping with depression and anxiety, I'm not sure I can say that Vipassana has really helped lessen the experience of these disorders. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Really, it goes to the heart of these last two sessions we've had on safety. So that question goes to the heart of it. So reviewing what we've said many times already, U Ba Khin said, it's Vipassana is not intended to treat illness. It's not a medical treatment. So that person's depression and anxiety, to me, it sounds like they merit the attention of a skillful medical practitioner because they're intense. The problems seem intense by the way this person's phrased the question, and they're chronic. Why should this person keep suffering? Like my friend said, if you're nearsighted and you live in any modern society, why don't you get glasses? If you've got anxiety and depression, why don't you get medical treatment for that? But before you get medical treatment, while you're getting medical treatment, after your medical treatment is completed, why don't you keep practicing Vipassana? It will strengthen your Vipassana that you've worked with such a difficult circumstance and not giving up. And it will strengthen your Vipassana when you have different sets of body sensations that are now there because of your anxiety and depression being differentially treated by either medication or other kinds of treatment. So why not get glasses if you're nearsighted?
So here's another touchy one for you, Paul. There have been some very rare cases of students, and there's a few questions here that touch upon this topic. There have been some very rare cases of students who leave courses and attempt or commit suicide within a few days, weeks, months, or years. Obviously, Vipassana is not the single precursor or cause of such a complex event. But can you talk about what does cause suicide?
Well, that's a topic that's slightly different than Vipassana. Um, there is an episode I had, this goes back quite a few years, and to a different country, not the United States or not India, but there was a student who left the course and committed suicide, and the family was very upset and alleged that Vipassana was to blame. Then the close friends of this young man who killed himself, the close friends who had taken the course with him, came forward and said, this young man had been through warfare in this country. It was a country where there was active warfare, say like Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, someone from a country where there's active military events going on. They had developed severe suicidal anxiety, and they imagined that Vipassana would help them. As we've been discussing for hours now, that's not our goal, and we have no capacity to help. And therefore, the person, out of desperation, you could say with prodromal illness, or you could say with syndromal illness. He was already ill with the syndrome of suicidality, came to a course mistakenly, didn't get proper screening, and the suicidality existed long before he took the course. That's what we typically find. And we typically find, understandably, a person who's suicidal is desperate and will try things and even change the rules a little bit, seeking to get help for their desperate circumstance. Vipassana is not the right help for that. The things that cause suicide, that's a huge topic. We would spend a semester studying suicidality. It's been discussed since a famous book in the middle of the 19th century was the first book to focus entirely on suicide. It was written by a French sociologist, Émile Durkheim. And since then, suicidality is a complex topic. In general, we could say there are predispositions that tend towards it. Suicidality is not exactly the same as depression. There are people who are not depressed who become suicidal, maybe in a state of panic, maybe in a state of psychotic delusion. And there are people who are depressed and don't become suicidal at all. But typically, depression and suicide run together. And so things that traumatize people make them feel humiliated, ashamed, frightened, out of control, unable to feel communion with other people who might help them, unable to find adequate treatment facilities. Those are the causes of suicidality.
Mm-hmm.
It's found in every culture in the world. And as I said earlier, there's no human community that you will ever find that's free of suicidality.
Mm-hmm. And this student wants to know if a student leaves a course because of ideation, suicidal ideation, should the ATs follow up with the students that left, these kinds of students that left the courses? And are ATs obligated to inform the subject's family or authorities of students that may cause self-harm or harm of others?
Our ATs are not expected to treat suicidality. So if follow-up implies follow-up treatment or follow-up healthcare, follow-up psychotherapy, the answer is no. We're meditation teachers, that's all. But if the term follow-up means compassionate human interest and care, the answer is 100% yes. The AT should definitely follow up. And that distinction, the AT should follow up in the same way as a good friend, a compassionate friend who finds out their friend is sick, whether the sickness is cancer or diabetes or suicidality. You would expect your friend would give you a call, say, how are you doing today? I heard you were really upset yesterday. Are you okay? Are you getting treatment? Are you getting health care? So those would be the kinds of follow-ups that should certainly be part of our tradition. Uh, the issue of obligated to tell others is a more technical issue, and it has to do with the probability of harm as measured against the confidentiality that we give our students. When students talk to their AT, it's in confidence. The confidence should stay, but if there's a clear and present danger, confidentiality needs to be violated to protect against clear and present danger. And that's true whether the issue is suicide or the issue is very rarely, but it can happen, threatened harm against other people. So that's a slightly more technical. I think that's the best we can do in a conversation like this. That's a very, very rare circumstance. It could happen, of course.
So there's a couple of questions around practicing Vipassana while suffering from ADHD. Do you have any comment or suggestion on how somebody with ADHD who has a hard time concentrating can practice?
Okay. Well, I've seen it go both ways. The concept of ADHD is now a very diffused concept. A lot of people with a lot of kinds of minds and bodies are being told they have ADHD. Probably many of them do, probably some of them don't. It's a known feature in medicine that as a treatment emerges and as treatments get better, more people arise with the problem. When pneumonia was fatal, there were not many people seeking treatment for pneumonia. They were mostly dead. But as treatments for pneumonia improved, there were more people who needed treatment. Treatment for ADHD is now multifaceted. There are many treatments, medical, behavioral, etc. And a person with those problems could wisely benefit from those treatments. So more people are seeking the treatments that are there. The term gets more applied, but it gets over-applied too. I would say we find there are some people who come to courses with a history of ADHD and do find it just not right for them. They just cannot bring concentration to bear. And that's not, Vipassana is not the right practice for that person. But we find many people, many, who have exactly the opposite experience. Their difficulty concentrating is not actually a concentration disorder. It's a distractibility disorder that's very frequently confused by individuals, by schools, even by psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. Once persons like that arrive at the course where there's no distractions, no talking, silence, no television, no cell phones, no work, nothing to worry about, they find their concentration is totally normal, maybe excellent. They have no trouble taking a course, and they have no trouble utilizing Vipassana the rest of their life. So there's not an exact guideline, but many people can take Vipassana if they have ADHD. That word should not be used as a barrier. However, that word should alarm both the student and the teachers of the upcoming course to have an examining conversation. Is this likely to be just too much for the person, or is this likely to be quite helpful, just what the doctor ordered?
Great, thank you. So there's just the very last question.
Okay.
Um, who are these stuffed animals behind you?
Okay. Well, um, when uh, when screens and Zoom became part of daily life, maybe during the pandemic, even a little before the pandemic, this room I'm sitting in became a room in which I interacted with many kinds of people on many topics. It could be Vipassana conversations, more or less codified and formal, say Pariyatti recorded conversations or interactions with students or centers. But it also became a room in which I hung out and interacted with a lot of people alongside of Susan and with our family, with our friends. And some of our interactions included conversations with stuffed animals talking to each other across the screen. In fact, that continues. So it's a real part of my life. And when it came up that I'd be giving relatively more formal conversations like this, I saw no reason why they shouldn't be included. They are my friends. They do convey an atmosphere. We are a lay tradition, and these animals are part of my lay tradition. They do interact across the screen, and they're quite alive.
Well said, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Kory.
yeah, so thank you so much for doing this series on the power of small changes. I think a lot of people got a lot of benefit out of it. There was a lot of interest, and yeah, so I wish you a great day and look forward to our next conversations.
Thank you so much, Kory. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Paul and Kory, for joining us today. On behalf of Pariyatti, I'd like to thank you all for attending this event. Thank you.